Palestinian prisoner Walid Daqqa. He passed away last year. To this day, his family hasn't been allowed to bury him. Israel has kept his body. And that's the case for thousands and thousands of prisoners. Now, since October the 7th, Israel has arrested 17,000 Palestinians from both Gaza and the West Bank. And a lot of these prisoners, their families don't know where they are, which location they're in. They have been denied rights to a lawyer. They have been denied access to medical help. And a lot of Palestinians have died in prison since October the 7th. And we have seen the small amount of videos that we have seen from Israeli prisons show that Palestinians are being raped in prison, they're being tortured in prison, they're being starved in prison. It's horrifying. And that's why, when Palestine engages in any fight with Israel, people often ask why do Palestinians ask for the release of prisoners? It's because of what Israel does to them in prison. The release of prisoners in Palestine has always been a demand of the Palestinians because of how horrifying the situation is in Israeli prisons. And we're talking about women and children and men. Israel doesn't discriminate. It will take anyone into their prisons. So that's kind of, I guess, a very, very brief history. There was a lot there, but there was that's kind of a brief history. One thing Israel that I didn't mention. One thing that Israel done when it was established, it passed a law called the Law of Return. This allows any Jewish person in the world to go to Israel to establish a life in Israel. They would be given full citizenship, they would be given full rights in Israel, anywhere in the world. So a Jewish person living in South Africa, a Jewish person living in America, a Jewish person living in the UK, who has never been to Palestine, has no connection to Palestine, is allowed to go, because they're Jewish, to establish their homeland there. Whether it's Palestinians who have been exiled from Palestine, aren't allowed to go back. Their homes have been taken over by Zionists. They have never been allowed to go back home. Their homes are probably burned to the ground and something else is there now. And that's the system of apartheid that the government of Israel implemented. Now, what does the UK government have to do with it? So obviously the UK government has been very much a big instrumental part in this. We spoke about when the government established the Balfour Declaration, so when it promised Palestine to the Jewish people. But since then, every single government that has come has been an ally to Israel. The government gives Israel complete immunity to do what it does. It gives it legal impunity as well. Like there's a current court case, and I encourage you all to watch it. That is happening at the moment, where a Palestinian group called Al-Haq is currently taking the government to court because of the weapons that it sells to Israel. Because the government refuses to accept that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide, and therefore is continuing to sell weapons to Israel. The government has trade with Israel. The government signed a very, very big trade agreement less than 5 years ago called the UK-Israel Bilateral Trade Agreement. And this isn't just like trade. We're talking about connecting every sector within the country to Israel. So for example, and this will help us kind of understand what we can do. So for example, universities are partnering with Israeli universities to conduct research, for example. Israel's a very big tech country. So it does a lot of AI development and research. This AI research is then used to work machines to then drop bombs in Gaza. A lot of the bombs that are being dropped in Gaza and a lot of the missiles that are being dropped in Gaza are being dropped by machines, not by people. And that's developed in Israeli universities. So UK universities will partner with Israeli universities to help their research. For example, in councils, each council has something called a pension fund. So all of us here who pay our taxes will also most likely pay our employer a pension. If you work for the council, it goes to the council pension fund. And the council will invest that money into a range of different things. Unfortunately, a lot of councils invest that in Israeli weapon companies, like BAA Systems, Elbit Systems, a lot of these different weapon companies. The pension funds are directed into that. There's also, in terms of trade, the NHS, for example, is currently looking at how to implement more AI within the NHS, so they can free up more doctors. It's getting a lot of that AI from Israel, unfortunately. And so there's so many different sectors and different areas whereby the UK is partnering with Israel. And sometimes I understand it can be very hard to look at the situation, and it looks very hard. Obviously, the scenes coming out of Gaza are so horrifying. They're so, it feels like every single day there's a new way that Israel is creating to kill Palestinians. The images are so barbaric, and it can feel like, how do we stop this? How do we do anything about this? Why? I don't feel like there's anything I can do, right? Surely I'm powerless. And before I kind of go into what we can do, I want to first look at our Islamic duty, because we're first and foremost Muslims before anything else. And as a Muslim, we have to have yaqeen in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qadr. We have to believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised us victory. So we know victory is coming, right? And it's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when and how that victory is delivered, right? Of course, we also believe that every person that is killed in Gaza is a martyr, and martyrs have the highest status possible in Islam. But it's important to remind ourselves of that, because it's the job of the other side to make sure that we feel helpless, to make sure that we feel like there's nothing we can do, so that's it, we're all just going to sit at home, we're going to feel sad for them, but that's it, there's nothing we can do. Actually, there is so much that we can do, and that we have so much power to do stuff. And that is why Israel, for example, has its own government department that it spends towards social media, for example, just as an example, right? Because it sees the amount of pro-Palestine social media posts online, and it dedicates so many amount of money and resources and people in order to counter that. So to make sure that there are more pro-Israel posts online. Okay, so even the simple act of posting online, speaking about the issue, will help your network and their network and their network to understand more about the issue. Because the reality is, a lot of wider society, they look at what's happening, they're like, okay, we feel bad, but we don't know what's happening, we don't know the history, we don't know, and so we don't know the stance that we should take. And it's our job, first and foremost, to educate wider society. Now, I hope, inshallah, that all of you were at the protest yesterday, inshallah. 500,000 people, right? Stuff like this angers Israel so much, because it spends so much money on propaganda, it spends so much money convincing world governments to be its allies, to give it impunity, to give it cover, and yet people haven't been fooled by their attempts, right? People aren't represented by their governments, right? The British government is such an ally to Israel, yet 500,000 people came out to the streets yesterday to protest what the government is doing, right? And to protest the government's policies on what it's doing to Israel. So first and foremost is the very small things. Sharing posts online, making sure that those around you are aware, attending protests. I know that sometimes people say, what's the point? Protests aren't going to change anything, right? But every single protest is more pressure on the government. And actually, you'll be so incredibly surprised how many people, new people, come to protest from wider society. Like, I'm not the last protest, the one before. I met a girl who said, I come from a Jewish Zionist family. You know, my family they're very, very Zionist. They support Israel. I've always been brought up with the idea that Israel's our homeland. Israel is the only safe place in the world for Jewish people. And I would see these protests. I was told that these pro-Palestinians are hate marches. And I decided one day to come to one to see if it was true. And she's like, I've never been so horrified about all the lies that I was taught. So imagine, she's seeing the massive amounts of protests that are taking place and the numbers. And she was saying, how is it that 500,000 people are lying? Surely that's not true. So she went to the protest to see, and she discovered the truth. And so that's why it's so important to continue coming to protests. I know, again, I know sometimes that it says that people say, what's the point? There's no protest. But we have to believe as Muslims, you know, the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah will not change a people until they change themselves. So unless we're doing everything that we can possible, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't going to bring that victory. If we're just sitting all at home and we're doing nothing, then victory is not going to come until new people come that actually want to change things and do everything they can. If you're a student at a university, it's so important that you research what your university invests in. You'll notice, for example, in many universities that are happening now, there are encampments where students will camp at universities, where students will have protests at universities. It's important to educate yourself on what your university is investing in, because I imagine there'll be a significant number, for example, of international students, and you're paying a lot of money to come to universities here. In return, the university is using that money to invest in weapons companies. Right? This isn't normal, right? Sometimes people want to, universities or governments, they want to convince us that this is normal. It's not normal, right? The money that, whether it's home students or international students are being paid in, should be put in to better the education, right? To better the university, to better the research facilities, for example. It shouldn't be going to research AI that is helping kill Palestinians in Gaza, right? This isn't what your tuition fees should be paid for. And so it's important that, first of all, you educate yourself on how your university is investing money. And you don't need to join the encampments if you don't want to. But it's important that you join the efforts that put pressure on the university to divest these. Right? And there has been, like, I'm always so inspired by students. Like, students, subhanAllah, in every injustice, not just Gaza, in every injustice, whether it was South Africa apartheid, whether it was the racism that took place in America and still take place today, students historically around the world have been at the forefront of every fight against injustice. And you have to feel inspired by what these students are doing. Like, I don't know if people saw, for example, the student in America who used his graduation speech to speak about what's happening in Gaza, right? And currently, the university is withholding his degree, right? So he's finished university. They're not allowing him to graduate with a degree because he spoke about Gaza. And the university does this to intimidate others, right? So that you don't talk about Gaza, so that you stay silent, so that you don't speak out against injustice, right? And it's important to know here as well that every time governments and universities and whatever it is, when they allow Israel to do more and more massacres, to do more and more horrifying acts, to ignore international law, you're allowing anyone in the world to do this. Because any country can turn around and say, but you let Israel do this. And so why should you implement international law for me? You didn't implement international law for Israel, and Israel got away with doing everything. Don't come and put it on me, right? Which is exactly what's happening today with Russia and Ukraine, right? Russia is turning around and saying, well, actually, you're ignoring international law for Israel. Don't come and say to me international law, right? And if we don't have systems that keep countries accountable, anyone in the world can do whatever they want, right? And that's not a way by which humans will live, right? And so again, if you're a student in a university, you have a big role to play. Join the efforts in your campus, and if there's nothing happening in your campus, start something. As Muslims, we should also be at the forefront of any fight against injustice. Right? There's the hadith, and I'm paraphrasing, but where the Prophet ﷺ said, if Yawm al-Qiyamah comes, the Day of Judgment comes, and you have a seed in your hand, then you should plant that seed. Right? So no act is too small. No act, because imagine if everyone in the world said, what difference can I make? There's no difference that I can make. Right? But if every one of us did even something small, that will cause a big effect, right? And we're seeing that. Imagine if yesterday every single person said, what's the point of protests? We wouldn't have had 500,000 people in London, right? And so don't neglect the role that you have to play. As Muslims, we believe that the results are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The ultimate results are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Muslims, we're not held accountable for results. We're held accountable for our own efforts. What did you do? What role did you play? What skills do you have that you can use to help? If you're a student, you can do this. If you work for the council, you can get your council to divest. And so many councils across the country have divested their money from Israeli companies to other more ethical companies. And you know how we know it's working? Because the last government, the conservative government, tried to pass a law that would ban councils from divesting their money from Israel. And it failed. That law failed. And the government wouldn't have tried to pass this law if councils weren't divesting their money, if things weren't working, right? So we can, and economics is a very big way which you can hurt another country by. Right? So if we're divesting our money from education, if we're divesting our money from universities, if we're divesting our money from research, if we're divesting our money from councils, that's a huge economic loss for Israel. Huge economic loss. And it does significant amount of damage. And so it's so incredibly important to research. If you work for a private company and they invest money, where are they investing their money to, right? For example, banks. There has been a huge campaign to get Barclays Bank, for example, to divest its money, right? And so many people across the country have closed their Barclays account in protest of its policies. And slowly, Barclays is divesting its money. Yesterday, for example, I'm sure you all know the Shop Cooperative, voted yesterday at its annual meeting to divest fully from Israel. Now if you watch the news, you wouldn't know all of this is happening, right? Because again, they want to convince you there's nothing you can do, you're helpless, there's no change that you can make, but all these changes, all these small changes add up to make a big change, right? You have power, you have abilities, you have skills that you can use, you know? It's about what world are we building for our future generations, our kids, you know? When people look back at big historical things, right? People always look back at, for example, slavery or the Holocaust or whatever it was and say, how did people at the time allow it to happen, right? And we should be able to want to say, when the biggest massacre of our time was happening in Gaza, We did everything we could. And we fully believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us victory. Right? And we have never, I promise you, we have never been closer to Palestinian liberation as we have at this moment in time. Israel is using horrific military power because it has lost so much. It is isolated on the globe, right? So many governments have isolated itself from Israel, right? Israel is completely an isolated state on the global stage, right? Israel is boycotted at so many levels. The amount of shops, companies, corporations that boycott Israel is increasing every single day. It is on trial in the biggest world courts in the world, right, for genocide. It is being exposed at every single level. And that is why Israel spends so much money on propaganda, and even then it is failing. Like, look how many people are not convinced by what is happening in Israel, or by the genocide that is happening in Gaza, by Israel's actions. Look at the amount of people that have embraced Islam since the Gaza genocide. So many people have said, how are people in Gaza staying strong? How have they not given up? Because of their iman. Because the moment that we further away ourselves from our religion, the moment we start to have doubts, is the moment, that's when our ummah is in crisis, right? The closer to we are in our faith, the more we are certain in our yaqeen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us a strong ummah. We are the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That's a strong ummah. So we need to act like it. We need to act like we have power, that we aren't weak, that we aren't helpless. And there are so many things that we can do. Build a relationship with your MP. Your MP is there to represent you, right? They should know your views, right? Every time there's a vote in Parliament, you should email your MP and say, I want you to vote like this, right? And if your MP doesn't vote the way that you want them, you tell them, I'm not going to vote for you in the next election, right? This is a democracy, supposedly, whereby we elect MPs. So your MP is there to literally represent your views. You are his constituents, right? So build the relationship with your MP. Make sure you are continuing to put pressure on your MP. Every MP will do something called a surgery, where it's like an open meeting that constituents can come and visit their MP and talk about any issues that they want. Attend these meetings. Put pressure on your MP. Ask them why they are voting against the way that their constituents want, right? Your councillor. Build a relationship with your councillor. Go online and find out who your councillor is. It's very, very easy. Just go into Google and type in, who is my local councillor, right? And you put your postcode in, and it will tell you who your councillors are. Make sure you're putting pressure on your councillors to divest the council funds from Israel and from any investment that is putting illegal settlements in the West Bank, right? It's very, very easy, but unfortunately, too many of us don't know how easy these things are. We worry sometimes that I don't know how to email my MP, or I don't know what words to exactly use. There are so many templates online written out for you, and you just have to send it to your MP or to your councillor. They are there to represent you. So build a relationship with your MP. By the way, this isn't just for Gaza. This is for any issue. The next time an injustice happens, you should already have a relationship with your MP so that you can say to them, this is what I think about this cause, and I want you to represent my views, right? So build a relationship with your MP. Build a relationship with your councillor. Build a relationship with your school governors, for example. If you have children that go to school, make sure they're raising awareness about what's happening, what's taking place there, right? And the other side put so much money and propaganda into this. And there's one thing that they don't have. Well, there's many things that they don't have. But there's one very, very important thing that they don't have, is numbers. There are more pro-Palestinian people in this country than there are pro-Israeli people, right? We have huge number of people on our side. There is no way you would have ever seen a pro-Israel protest that attracted 500,000 people in this country, because there aren't 500,000 people that support Israel in this country, right? So we have numbers on our side. So we have to make sure that our representatives feel those numbers, right? There are local council elections coming up next year, right? And of course, we know every time there's an election, councillors want to be everyone's best friend, okay? Make sure you know, I'm only going to vote for you if you do X, Y, and Z, right? If you do 1, 2, and 3. And it's very, very simple. So there is, the point I'm trying to say is, there's nothing that we all have a role to play. And our role to play is going to be very different from one another. If you're a student, it's very different to what your role is from what a professional working is, right? If you have a child in school, your role is very different to someone that doesn't have children, for example, right? Every one of us has a role to play. And again, as people and as Muslims, it's important that you look at, Islam's not a passive religion. Islam's a very, very, very active religion. Islam is at the forefront of fighting against injustice, no matter who it is against. If there was, obviously we have a close connection to Palestine because of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the holy city of Jerusalem. But even if there was no Muslims in Palestine, we should still be at the forefront of what's happening, because Islam is against injustice anywhere in the world. Okay? So how do we become active people? We look at what skills we have and we see where can that be best implemented. And the reason I talk about politics a lot is because, yes, giving to charity is 100% important. But do you know what's happening right now? In Egypt, at the border, the Rafah border between Egypt and Gaza, there is so much charity rotting because the border is closed. And that border isn't going to open because of charity. That border is going to open because of political pressure. So we can give as much charity as we want, but charity is important. And of course, as Muslims, we have to give sadaqah, we have to give zakah. But charity isn't going to fix a political situation. Charity is like putting a plaster on, right? That plaster is going to fall off one day, right? And that plaster isn't going to fix the broken bone, right? Political pressure is what's going to help fix the broken bone, right? And then we can give as much charity as we want. But until we open that border, right, none of the aid is going to go in. And we can then, even after the border is open, we can continue to give as much charity as we want, but there's still going to be bombs dropping. And bombs aren't going to stop with charity. They're going to stop with political pressure. So we need to use the politics to stop the bombs and to open the border, and then give as much charity as we want to help rebuild Gaza, inshallah. But it's so important that as Muslims, we don't shy away from politics. We don't shy away from making change, right? We should be at the forefront for change, because what's happening in Gaza is going to affect every single person in this world, Muslim or non-Muslim. If we let Israel get away with what it is doing at the moment in Gaza, it will happen in any country in the world. The moment we stop holding countries to accountable, we stop putting pressure as people on our government, they're going to feel that they can allow any country in the world to do what it wants. And that's not a world that we want for our children and future generations. And that's not a world that we want on the Day of Judgment to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say we allowed that to happen. Right? You have to do every single thing that you can, and change is happening. But no change took place overnight. Even if you read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba that came after him, and all the Islamic empires that came after that, right? They went through so much injustices. Like if we look at when the Prophet and the Sahaba were boycotted by Quraysh for 3 years, right? Imagine for 3 years, Quraysh wouldn't give them food, Quraysh wouldn't give them water. They were eating leaves. These are the same scenes that we're seeing in Gaza. Imagine the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba would tie a rock onto their stomach from hunger, and they would go to the Prophet, and when the Prophet would lift his shirt, he had 2 rocks tied to his stomach. So nothing that is happening now has not happened before. Atrocities have happened and people have won, right? The truth always wins, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us that the truth always wins. And people have been, I know it's hard to imagine, but people have been through worse than what's happening in Gaza at the moment. You know, Ashab al-Ukhdud, who were thrown into fire, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala avenged for them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will avenge for the people of Gaza, right? In this life and in the hereafter, inshallah. But as Muslims, we have a role to play, especially that we live in a country that gives so much to Israel. So just to kind of to conclude, and I'm not sure timing wise how I'm doing, but look at what skills that you have. Make sure that you're employing your skills in the best way possible. If you are a really good speaker, make videos, for example. Make social media videos. Social media has been such a powerful tool. There are no journalists, international journalists in Gaza. We are finding out what's happening in Gaza because people in Gaza are filming on their social media, right? And social media has played a very, very important part. And for example, we see there's the BBC, Sky, Channel 4, they're not going to report on what's happening in Gaza. It's our job to break that barrier, right? Every time you see a headline on the BBC that is inaccurate, complain about it, right? Make sure that headline changes. And the BBC does change headlines if people complain, for example, right? So find out what skills you have and use those skills. Build a relationship with your representatives, whether it's your local councillor, whether it's your local MP, whether it's your local governing board in the school, right? Build relationships with them. And again, we're talking about long term. We're not just talking about Gaza. The next time an injustice happens, you should already have a relationship with your MP built in place, okay? Make sure you are, where you see something incorrect in the media, complain about it. The media actually, a lot of times journalists will say to us, no one has emailed in, no one has complained, right? When they see a wrong headline. So complain if you don't see a right headline, right? Write about what's happening in Gaza. Raise awareness. You know, there's so many leaflets online, for example. Print out leaflets and go to your local city centre or your local shopping centre or whatever it is and hand out leaflets. People are becoming aware of what's happening in Gaza. So many people that didn't know about Gaza before October are now finding out about Gaza. And it's our job to make sure that as many people in this country know about what's happening in Gaza. It's very, very easy. Protest at your local Barclays, or if it's shops that are refusing to boycott. You know, that is your right. Put pressure until they stop boycotting. If you know a Muslim shopkeeper, for example, make sure they're not selling Israeli dates. Make sure they're not selling Israeli products, right? Make sure you're putting pressure on us as a Muslim community first, and then the local wider community. And make sure you and yourself, your family, your friends, that you are still boycotting Israeli products. It is so important when you're going to the shops and doing your grocery shopping, make sure you're not buying any fruits or vegetables that come from Israel. Boycotting hurts Israel so much. And we have to keep going. Make sure you are boycotting Starbucks and McDonald's and all these places. They have lost so much money. And we have to continue that pressure. And I promise you, inshallah, the more that we keep working, the closer we will get to the victory that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to see not just the liberation of Gaza, but the liberation of Palestine in its entirety, and the liberation of Jerusalem, inshallah, and that we are all able to pray one day, inshallah, in a liberated Masjid al-Aqsa, together in congregation, and that liberation is achieved for our entire ummah, not just Palestine, because only when we are all liberated that we will be able to be a unified ummah. I pray that injustice is no longer reigns our countries. I pray that injustice no longer has roots in our countries. I pray that our countries are freed from injustice. They're freed from corruption. They're freed and they are truly becoming the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I apologize for taking too much time. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much for Sister Yasmine for the powerful and insightful talk. Now I will open the floor for a Q&A session. If any of the audience has a question, please feel free to stand or raise your hands.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sister Yasmine, thank you so much. So many things in my mind that I had no answer, to be honest. I can read it in the social media, but I have no answer for that. Few things that I can summarize, at least two. Number one, what really Israel wants with Palestinian lands? I know that in the social media they say that, oh, this is our holy land. We want to stay there. We want to live there. But it's hard to believe, Nauzubillah, if they can occupy 100% of Palestinian, they are going to be more religious, worship to their God. I don't think so. Hard to believe. So there must be something, economical reasons why they want to occupy Palestine. Maybe you are from Moslem Association of Britain. You know some intelligent information about that. Number one. Number two, as you know that United States is the main supporter of Israel, right? If they want to be generous, why they don't just allocate their land somewhere in the United States, give it to Israel? They will be living in peace, rather than occupying Palestinian territory. So this is the questions that really I don't have any answer yet, to be honest with you. So then the last point is about this one. So we are talking about remembering the Nakba, but someone bought something that we boycott this. So I encourage whoever bought this one, don't buy this bottle anymore, please. We have to boycott this, right? That's for me. Thank you so much. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much for the question. So do you want to answer it directly, or do you want to gather?
We can take a couple
Okay. Any more questions?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Sister Yasmine. That was a very powerful sort of talk that you gave us just now. I think there are two things that I probably the same with Pak Waskito. I didn't have the answer either. So all these things about making sure that you either directly or non-directly actually investing to the Israelis' economy or companies. But at the moment, at least me, I don't actually know, for example, when I pay my pension, where do they go? They don't give me any reports in terms of where they're investing, etc., etc. And also, for example, so I work for the NHS. I don't know where this NHS pension goes. And also, in terms of, as you said, some of the AI companies that they use, I haven't got a clue. I don't know. And there isn't any information out there. I don't know whether they do it on purpose so that we are kept in the dark. Where do I get those information from? Do I need to ask my trust what sort of companies that they use and whether they are actually related, or whether there are organizations that actually would help us to find these informations and actually then help us to then go back to our workplace and say, I do not want you to invest in Israelis and I'm your employer, I have a say about this. That's probably number one. Number two, if you look at Germany at the moment, it seems to be that the Israelis and the Zionists, they made that they have, because of what they've done in the past, they actually use that as a weapon, if you like, for Germany to also offer this impunity. Is there any way that we could do the same narratives? Because obviously the British government obviously is the one who started all this. Without the chaos that they started with the Balfour Declaration, we wouldn't be in this situation. Is there anything that we could also develop a narrative to say, look, you guys responsible for this, so you better stop it? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Do you think we have enough questions, or do you want more? Okay.
Okay, Jazakallah khair for the questions. Why is Israel doing this, and what does it want with Palestine? It's very, very interesting. A lot of Jewish people that live in Israel are atheists. They don't believe, they're not religious. They don't believe in God at all. They what they call is culturally Jewish. They only take the cultural aspects of things, but they're not religious. But they'll still say God promised us this land, and so it's true. It comes from a range of aspects. First of all, there is a religious aspect. They believe the Messiah is going to come and is going to come in the Holy Land and to liberate them. So there's a small religious aspect to it. It's part of asserting, more politically, it's part of asserting a Western presence in the Middle East. Now we're looking at the state of Arab countries and how they're aligned with Israel. If we look at Egypt, for example, and I can be as harsh as I want here because I'm Egyptian. It's what Egypt's doing is absolutely shameful. When we had the first elected president, Dr. Mohammed Morsi, Allah yarhamu, the border, I remember Israel had started a war in Gaza. He ended it in 6 days. He opened the borders, all the aid was allowed in. The border was never closed, and he put enough pressure on Israel that it stopped the war in 6 days. Now, Israel wouldn't be able to do what it's doing without Jordan and Egypt, because those two countries share borders. So Jordan shares borders with the West Bank, and Egypt shares borders with Gaza. Israel wouldn't be able to do this without the approval of Jordan and Egypt. Egypt, if it wanted to, could open the borders, could allow aid in. The same with Jordan. Jordan could allow aid into the West Bank. The West Bank needs aid as well. Actually, what Jordan and Egypt are doing are arresting Egyptians and Jordanians that are critical of the government and what it's doing in Israel. And there are so many people in Egyptian and Jordanian prisons. It's really, really bad. And that's why when we make dua and we want to make change, we make dua for all our countries because the what's happening in Gaza, if we were a united ummah, Muslim armies would be able to stop what's happening in Gaza. Muslim armies are some of the strongest armies in the world. and would have been able to stop what's happening in Gaza from the first day. But what we have instead is governments that are puppets, essentially, and that are controlled with their allegiance to the West. And because they rely on, for example, I know that Egypt is the second biggest military aid recipient from the US. Egypt relies on the US so much for military aid. And the US is using that as control to make sure that Egypt stays in the same line as Israel. Otherwise, it's not going to give it military aid that it needs. And Egypt, the government is so corrupt that Egypt needs all the money in the world. It's in so much debt, so much corruption, so much is the situation. Everyone's in the poverty line in Egypt. That's the situation in Egypt. So back to kind of why is Israel doing this? Again, there's a religious aspect. There's also, it's in the West's interest to ensure that the governments of the people around Israel are kept in line. The biggest threat that Israel saw from the Middle East was the Arab Spring, right? The Arab Spring, when it took place, was such a threat to what's happening in Israel. So, if we look at Syria, for example, Bashar al-Assad was one of Israel's best friends, right? Now that the Syrian people have had a revolution and that they have liberated themselves and they have a new government, Israel is doing as much as possible to make sure that it stays in line. And Syria is in such a bad economic country that it has to rely on the US. And obviously the US is saying, we're only going to do this if you accept Israel. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle. We're only going to give you something if you do this. And the country can't survive without this, so it has to accept this. So it's a continued cycle. And that's why I don't believe that the liberation of Palestine will happen until the liberation of the Arab countries first. Because you can't be liberated and be surrounded by corrupt countries. It doesn't work. So that's why. The American role is interesting, actually, because America has always been the biggest ally of Israel, the biggest weapon supplier, the biggest aid supplier, and that's why Israel spends so much money in American politics to make sure that American politicians vote in a way that is in line with Israel. The surprising thing is, actually, more and more people from the Republican Party, which is Donald Trump's party, are speaking out about what's happening in Israel. So, for example, one of the biggest Republican or well-known Republicans, her name is Marjorie Greene, and she said, we're in such a bad economic state. People can't afford to buy groceries. People can't afford to put their kids in universities. And we're signing away billions and billions worth of money to Israel. Shouldn't that money first be put into America? You know, if Donald Trump's slogan is America first, right? Surely we should be putting America before everyone. Right now it feels like it's Israel first, right? It's not America first. But if we want to implement America first, and I think that's a great idea, invest in your country. Don't invest in foreign wars that you have no reason to do. And it's bringing you more hassle than good. More people in your country are waking up against you and are speaking out against you because of this. Actually, if Donald Trump invested that money into America, people would actually support him. So actually there are cracks happening in America, and more people are waking up. And I think actually it's interesting. If you look at, for example, the American hostage that was released last week, I think, Eden Alexander. America did that by completely bypassing Israel. And Donald Trump, unfortunately, who we have for the next 4 years, has actually made lots of comments actually against Israel. And said recently, for example, he said, well, we give you all the money in the world. Like, why? What do you want more? There's a sense of arrogance from Israel that he senses. And so I think it's going to take time, unfortunately, but slowly, there are more and more cracks happening in the American political system. Again, especially, for example, with what's happening in American universities, students that are speaking out against what's happening there. And people that aren't pro-Palestine are seeing what's happening to students and saying this is wrong. You're arresting students because they're against a foreign war. It doesn't make sense. Is this America first or Israel first? So I hope that answered the question. With regards to healthcare, there's a really brilliant organization called Healthcare Workers for Palestine. They're at every single protest, mashallah. But they have lots of resources that will be able to help you. They have resources that will be able to, for example, email templates, NHS policies, for example. Like I know, for example, that the health secretary a few days ago said that he was going to ban any healthcare workers from wearing any pro-Palestine badges or anything like that. I know that the healthcare workers have been lobbying against it. So I would connect with them first and foremost. And I think what they do is they have local groups. So you'll actually hopefully be able to find other people within your trust that you can connect with and help and work with. But in terms of kind of generally, if we're looking at pensions and councils and stuff, it's very easy to go on to, you should know who manages your pension fund, your pension generally, and you should be able to go online and find out where that money is being invested. I don't completely know how it works with NHS pensions because I know they're quite different from everyone else's pensions. But for NHS specifically, I would recommend the Health Workers for Palestine. And then just as like a general point on boycott, sometimes it can be overwhelming with you need to boycott this and you need to boycott that and you need to boycott this. And sometimes we forget or we don't know or we're not sure. There's actually, alhamdulillah, there's been like a lot of good initiatives, mashallah, like apps that allow you to just, as when you're doing your grocery shopping, to just scan something and it'll tell you if it's on the boycott list or not. So there's an app called No Thanks. There's an app, yeah, perfect. And there's an app called Boycott as well. So I think there's maybe 2 or 3 different apps that you can download on your phone, and it'll help you keep in line with what's boycott, what's not boycott. There's also the BDS website. The BDS website will give you a full list of what's boycott and what's not. In terms of developing a narrative here in the UK, it's so important. I think sometimes people in the UK, wider society especially, they're like, well, that's happening in the Middle East. What's it got to do with us? What's it got to do with me? And actually, not a lot of people that are familiar with kind of the Palestine cause are aware of the Balfour Declaration. And that Arthur Balfour was the UK Foreign Secretary that promised Jews a land in Palestine. And that's why it's so important that, first of all, we raise awareness. So many people, and this is a general point generally, it's important to know history, whether it's Islamic history or otherwise. It's important to learn history because, like I said, nothing that is happening at the moment is new. Everything that we're seeing now has happened before in history. And so it's important that we read history and read the seerah, for example, read the time of the Sahaba, but also learn the history of the causes that we are fighting because, first of all, we can learn from history. We can learn about what mistakes were made in the past so we can avoid them. And we can learn about what responsibilities our governments have and what role they played, right? Sometimes when you're lobbying politician or when you're lobbying the government, they'll say, we're doing everything we can. It's actually, no, but you promised that land in the first place. Israel wouldn't have been created if it wasn't for the British. right? And Palestine didn't belong to the British in the first place. It was under the Ottoman Empire. And so it's important that people learn about this. It's important that people learn about the Balfour Declaration and that the role that the UK government played in that from the start. The UK government isn't just complicit now. It was complicit from the start. And so raising awareness about that and using it in every single time we speak to our politicians, every single time we have to remind them it's your responsibility because of the Balfour Declaration, right? So you don't just have a responsibility to make what's right now, but what mistakes you made from the start as well, right? You have reparations that you need to pay, and you have errors that you need to be held accountable for the crimes that you did back then. Like the British armed Zionist militias to go and terrorize Palestinians so that they would leave their homes, and ultimately it would be taken up by Jews, right? Palestinians who were the natives of that homeland, as a result of the Balfour Declaration, were turned into a minority in their homeland, right? So it's important to use it again and again and again, and to educate people, because unfortunately not enough people know about the Balfour Declaration. It's important that people learn what role the UK played with. And when you learn the role that Western governments and what your government played, you learn the responsibility that we have as well, right? Again, sometimes we're like, what power do we have? We're sitting here and what's happening in Gaza is in the Middle East. Actually, our governments play such an important part, which is why we have to continue the pressure on our governments. We have to continue the pressure because Israel relies on Western governments' influence, and it relies on Western governments' support. Israel wouldn't be able to do what it does if it didn't have the support of America and the UK. So yeah, I hope that answers both questions.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive answer. Any more questions?
Just comment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just comment about the control. Control in Middle East. Don't you think that Donald Trump, when they make an agreement with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and also UAE, is part of the process for him to control this Middle East?
Oh, 100%.
Just comment actually. That maybe
No,
from the organization.
no, 100%. I know that in Donald Trump's first term, so when he was president first, not now, when he was president in his first term, he signed something called the Abraham Accords, where countries, Middle Eastern countries, normalized relationships with the US. One of those countries was supposed to be Saudi Arabia, right? Now, Saudi Arabia said very honestly to Trump, the king said at the time, he said, I want to normalize with Israel, but I know that my people will stand against me if I normalize with Israel. So I need to give my people something in order to give you normalization. I'm not going to give you normalization for free. Give me something to give to my people so that I can improve economics in my country, so that people can live in people are wealthy, people have a comfortable lifestyle, so they're not going to object. You know, if you're living nice and rich, why would you want to change that, right? And so when we saw Donald Trump's latest visit just a few days ago to Qatar, UAE, and Saudi, the big celebrations that these countries put on for Donald Trump, it's because of all these economic deals that Trump went and signed on with the Gulf countries. Because why are Gulf countries rich? They're rich because of the oil. The oil is going to run out one day, and they know this. They need alternatives to make sure that they are still economically strong countries. So they need economic deals with Western countries. So the more the more economic deals that they are able to get from the US, they're able to put their people in a comfortable lifestyle and normalize with Israel in return. The king doesn't care the King of Saudi, he doesn't care. He wants to normalize, but he wants to be able to give his people something so that they don't stand against him. Yeah, that's a brief explanation, I guess. It's crazy. It's all linked, and that's why it's important that we have a good understanding of our history, so that we can understand what's happening at the moment.
Thank you. Maybe any more questions? Okay, so this is okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, sister. I just like a quick question. This is from the people that I met in, like, I know some Saudis that I know some Emirati that I know as well. They have like a different views of towards Palestine. I mean, like the Saudis, obviously, like they cannot say anything. It's like even on social media, if the government knows about it, they could get caught, and put in jail. And whereas the Emirati, there are two different point of view that they say. Like, basically, there's this Emirati guy that I know, like he's not really towards pro-Palestine. The reason because he said that the countries has already give quite a lot to Palestine, and in terms of money, but it was used. Obviously, like some of the leaders in the Palestine, they corrupt, they use it for their personal advantages, right? So the view is already like changed for him, and that's the first thing. The second thing is I wanted to ask whether do you think like for a Palestine being under one of the Arab countries, say like Palestine being part of Saudi, would solve the issues? What do you think that would solve the issues? I wanted to ask that question. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Maybe I'll add one more question if that's okay. Also, I think one of the solutions that is widely accepted by the people is that the two-state solutions and the ceasefire. Of course, we want ceasefire. But we don't, obviously we don't want two-state. Is that from what I understand, the land belonged to Palestinians. And, well, the Zionist says that there was no Palestinians because they're Arabs. They're just Arabs. So why don't they go to other countries? Because the other countries in the Middle East are occupied by Arabs. But obviously the land belonged to Palestine and still belongs to Palestine. So how do we spread awareness that two-state solution is not the solution that is wanted by the Palestinian people? And also, how do we do that without being called like anti-Semite or racist by people? Because obviously that is their weapon. Every time we say that the land belongs to Palestinian, they will like call out anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. In terms of kind of the Gulf countries, UAE, Saudi, whichever it is, it's interesting because these governments put, again, so much propaganda into their own countries. So into making sure, spreading kind of false narratives about Palestine. So, and a lot of it is the same as Western narratives. So that Hamas is a terrorist organization that oppresses Palestinians, and the Palestinians deserve this because of what they did on October 7th. And the Palestinians, well, they were given a chance, and they rejected this. They've rejected two-state solutions. They've rejected this. They've rejected that. So they deserve everything that's happening to them at the moment. And what they do as well in these countries is they silence dissent. So they arrest the amount of shuyukh in prison in Saudi and the UAE and Bahrain is terrible. Like Sheikh Salman al-Auda, for example, who's in prison in Saudi and is being tortured at the moment. for speaking out against injustice. So what they do is they silence dissent, and then the rest of the country doesn't speak. And slowly, when you don't hear the other side, and all you hear is one side, you become convinced of that one side eventually. But just a point on that specific point on like, well, we've given them enough. It comes back to the point about charity versus politics, right? We can say tomorrow there is a country that says we're going to pay to rebuild Gaza, right? Let's say it costs billions of money. We're going to pay for that billions of money. That's not going to be very useful if next week Israel bombs it again, right? If Israel bombs every time the Palestinians rebuild, your charity is going to waste, right? And so that's why I say charity is like a plaster or a band-aid, right? It's not going to solve the problem. It's a temporary solution that helps feed people and is important, right? Don't get me wrong, it's very, very important. But it's not going to fix the root cause. Only politics is going to, and political pressure is going to solve that. And so until there's enough pressure on Israel to stop bombing Gaza indefinitely, every time you rebuild it, it's going to get bombed. And so that's just on that point specifically. In terms of kind of whether Saudi or any other Gulf country, I guess, is able to control Palestine, I think is the idea. I think people, the Palestinians should be able to have a state, their own state. They should be able to elect who they want. They should be able to represent who they want without being tied to another state. And without being, especially I think as we've seen, Gulf countries are very easily bought. Give them enough economic deals and they will do what you want. Give them enough give them enough military aid, like in Egypt, and they will do whatever you want. So ultimately, I think if Palestine was to go under one of these Gulf states, it'd be very easy to control. And by the way, this is actually something that was suggested at one point. Right now, Israel's talking about mass immigration of Palestinians out of Gaza. They said, why don't we take them to Saudi, for example? Why don't we take them to, I think this week they're saying Libya, for example. But all of these countries are actually saying no, because we know that people are going to rise against us, right? If we displace Palestinians from Gaza into our own countries and hand that over to Israel, that's just, no economic deals will be able to save us then, right? People will rise against us. In terms of the two-state solution, and it's funny because people talk about the two-state solution all the time, and what they don't realize is people, when they think two-state solution, they think it's 50%, 50%. Two-state solution is not 50%, 50%. Two-state solution would give Palestinians 22%, and that's it, 22%. So an even smaller part of the West Bank and Gaza, and that's it. Okay, but what about the Palestinian that was from Akka? Or what about the Palestinian that was from Haifa, or Nablus, or Jenin? Are they not allowed to go back home? Or do they have to remain a permanent refugee forever because of a two-state solution, right? And the funny thing is, the best argument against the two-state solution is actually the words of Israelis themselves. So Israeli politicians, particularly Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, they're known as the more far-right elements within the Israeli government. They speak about, they themselves speak against a two-state solution. They are like, we want all of Palestine, and so it's funny because when like the UK government talks about two-state solution, well, it's like, but the Israelis don't want a two-state solution, and the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. Where are you getting this two-state solution from, right? The Israelis aren't going to be satisfied with 80% of Palestine. They want 100% of Palestine, right? And so they think that they can contain them, but that greed is only going to be satisfied when they have 100% of Palestine. And how do we know this? They say it themselves. Like Ben Gvir has held conferences right outside Gaza called the resettlement of Gaza. Right? So we're going to clear Gaza from Palestinians, and then we're going to build these beautiful homes for settlers to come and take. Right? And so no one from both sides believes in a two-state solution. So I don't know why Western governments talk about a two-state solution. Two-state solution is dead. It's not a solution anymore. And I think the kind of the response. So first of all, in responding to how do we respond, and it's important that you learn how to respond to particular arguments so that you aren't called an anti-Semite. But also whilst realizing that anti-Semitism is something that is weaponized against people that speak about Palestine. Like if you look at the Palestine protests, for example, there are so many Jewish people that come to these protests. They are very, very vocal about I am Jewish and I reject Israel, right? And they say this because they know how the government likes to paint that all Jews are with Israel and all Jews feel unsafe because of these protests. But there's Jewish people in the protests, so how are they unsafe? And I don't know if anyone's ever seen in the protests as well, there's these descendants from Holocausts. Like there's Holocaust survivors that come to these protests and they say, we have survived the Holocaust and we're standing against this Holocaust. And so they themselves speak out against this. But still, it's important to learn how do we argue back and how do we argue back in the most efficient way possible. When people ask us, okay, you reject a two-state solution, what's the solution? What are you proposing instead? And the answer is very, very simple. It's a democratic state for everyone to live side by side, right? There shouldn't be no country in the world, right? We're not talking about Israel alone. No country in the world should be giving citizens more rights than another simply because of their religion, right? What Israel is practicing is Jewish supremacy. It is saying if you are Jewish, you have more rights than someone that is not Jewish. What it's doing to Palestinians is because they are not Jewish, right? Even though there's, people like to paint this as a Jewish versus Muslim war. The state of Israel has shut down, destroyed, bulldozed, expelled so many churches within Palestine. The Palestinian Christians, which are the oldest Christian population in the world, are declining. So many of them have been killed in Gaza. The churches in Gaza are the oldest churches in the world. They're being destroyed. The Palestinian Christian population in the West Bank, during their holy celebrations, whether it's Easter or Christmas or whatever, are prevented from going to their churches by the state of Israel. And so this isn't a Muslim versus Jewish war. Of course, as Muslims, we believe we have a connection to Masjid al-Aqsa. But Israel what it's doing is settler colonialism against all non-Jews, all Palestinians. And so what we're saying is we want equality for everyone. And if you're fighting against that, you're the problem, not us. We're not asking for anything controversial. We're just saying that there should be equality for everyone, that people that were driven from their homes should be allowed to return to their homes, and anyone is allowed to live there as long as they live with respect, with equality, and with dignity to all people. No one is given more rights than another based on their background, their religion, or their ethnicity. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. So why is it okay to happen in Israel? And they can't say God promised us this country. If I say God promised me this building, that doesn't give me the right to come and kick you all out from this building and for me to have this building to myself. It's not how it works, right? No one can come and just say, God promised me this or God promised me that. It's not how it works. Obviously, there's, the Islamic argument that we have. We know the story of Bani Israel in the Quran, right? And we know that they, more than any people in the world, were sent prophets and prophets and prophets, that more than that are mentioned in the Quran. We know that the people of Bani Israel were sent more prophets than any in the world and any in the history of mankind. And we saw the way they treated prophets. Bani Israel killed prophets. Bani Israel continuously rejected the messenger's words. They rejected the message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We saw how they treated the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And still, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made sure that the Jews that lived in Medina had rights as much as Muslims that lived in Medina. The Jews that lived in Medina were protected, right? The Jews that lived in Medina were able to practice Judaism. They weren't forced to convert to Islam. That's what we are asking for. We're not asking for anything special. We're not asking for anything controversial. We're asking for equality against equality for everyone. And the more you make your argument simple, the more you make it harder for them to argue back. And the more ridiculous they look for arguing back. Because and more, like I said, more and more people are waking up to this. More and more people are realizing the truth from the false and the truth from the lies. And this is in spite of all the propaganda and money and the billions that is put into convincing people otherwise.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer, Sister Yasmine. That's a very clear answers. Maybe I think we've got enough questions for today. Yeah, we've got enough questions for today. Thank you very much for the powerful and insightful talk that you gave. Any final message or comments that you like?
First of all, again, Jazakallah khair for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be in this beautiful, beautiful center, and I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts barakah in it and in all your activities. Secondly, again, as Muslims, I want us to always remind ourselves we come from an active religion. We come from a religion that praying, Islam isn't just praying in the masjid and that's it. Islam is standing against injustice, and the biggest injustice that is happening in the world right now is what's happening in Gaza. We are a religion that is powerful. We come from the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that is the strongest of ummahs. And so we need to believe that we have power, that we have, the more we educate ourselves, the more knowledge that we have, the more powerful we become. Because then we are aware and we know what tools that we have that we can use to pressurize those in power. We are not powerless like they want to convince us. As the scenes get more horrifying and more horrifying in Gaza, we have to do more. It's not enough to just feel sad for what's happening in Gaza and that's it. No, there is action that we can take. There's roles that we can play. Look at each one of ourselves has to reflect within themselves. What can I do? What skills do I have? And how do I also educate others? So I want, if you've learned anything today, and I hope inshallah everyone has, to teach it to others as well. So teach others about the history, teach others about what tools that we have in place. And slowly, we are getting, every day we are one step closer to the victory that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us, inshallah. And again, just keep the brothers and sisters in Gaza in your du'as, and keep that yaqeen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qadar in place as well. The further away we move from our religion, the weaker we become as an ummah. If we want to be a strong ummah, we have to be an ummah that is strong in our faith, an ummah that has yaqeen in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's victory. And yes, I pray that please forgive me for any wrongdoings or anything that I may have missed that is from myself, and anything that is good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Thank you very much again for Sister Yasmine. Once again, I would like to thank everyone for being a part of this important event. And I'd like to reiterate one message that's very powerful, is that don't shy away from politics. Because that's, I think, one of the most powerful weapon that we need to utilize in order to make the liberation of Palestine come true. Also, I've gained so much new knowledge, and I think we all do. We've all gained so much new knowledge and insights by hearing the talk that was given by Sister Yasmine. I hope that we all can carry what we've learned today into our daily lives, continue speaking out, continue educating our friends, so it doesn't stop on us. And then continue boycotting, speaking out, and to stand with Palestine. I think that brings us to the end of our talk today. Thank you very much once again. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah, thanks very much, sister. Very inspiring, truthfully. Okay, so before we close the session, so I want to remind you all that there's a book giveaway right there. It's worth taking a look if there's anything that matches your interest, and ada buku Bapak Ibu, silakan untuk dilihat-lihat. Kemudian gratis ya, ini giveaway ya. Jadi silakan apabila ada yang mau mengambil, dipersilahkan. Masih ada juga sampai ke belakang gitu. Jadi ya worth taking a look lah. Jadi setelah acara ini berakhir, mohon kesediaannya untuk melihat-lihat dulu bukunya, apabila ada yang berminat bisa diambil dan gratis ya. Baik, sebelum kita tutup, mungkin alangkah baiknya kita berfoto terlebih dahulu ya. Oke, silakan kepada Bapak Ibu yang ada di sini. Let's take the picture.